Hi, everybody. My name is Dušan Stojanović, the original founder of True Global Ventures. I'm thrilled to moderate this TGV Podcast 11, where we'll be discussing post-US election results. What's next for AI and blockchain? And it will be with Greg Kidd, co-founder and CEO of Hard Yakka Ventures, as we mentioned in the invitation as well. I've known Greg for quite a while and been seeing how he has also been first investor in companies like Twitter and Square, also compliance officer in Ripple and first investor, played an important role in Solana, and last but not least, also was going as an independent for Congress in the last US elections. Formerly also with the Fed, which I think is very interesting. Now, Greg, that's a little bit of your own background. Welcome to this podcast. We have people from everything from San Francisco to New York and many other parts of North America, as well as Europe, as well as Asia. So this is the slot that actually works for the whole globe. Greg, the first question I want to ask you is a long first introductory question, and we received a lot of questions prior to this. And the first one is kind of very, very long, but hopefully you can give us an in-detail analysis of that. How would you characterize, how things have been going, during the, let's say, last 4 years in terms of regulation, specifically in blockchain? Maybe you can add also a little bit of AI piece of it, where the SEC has been chaired by Gary Gensler, and now we have a shift in that with Paul Atkins taking over end of January. So how would you characterize regulation in general, maybe not only on SEC, maybe also other areas in the past 4 years, and how do you see that it can develop in the next 4 years?
Well, I think the last 4 years really have been characterized by fear of the existing administration that the change would get ahead of us. They were afraid of crypto and blockchain. They were afraid of AI. And so the behavior was what people do when they're afraid, is they try to slow things down, control it, maybe some effort to understand it, but first and foremost was to control it, and in particular was to control it not through the traditional tools of the legal and regulatory system, but it was a much more Tony Soprano approach of basically threatening to sue people and put them into court, regardless of whether they win or lose, especially really characterized by the SEC report approach of regulation by enforcement, and basically operating a shadow regulatory system for shaming people for getting ahead of this, because they were so fearful they didn't even want to have rules because they thought they might come up with the wrong rules. And now we have a sea change. If you think of the S curve of adoption for new technologies, we were at that point where they were trying to cut this off before it got to the steep part of the adoption curve. They did not want, for instance, crypto getting into and intermixing with the mainstream of the financial system. And now we're at the point where we've had the people have spoken. There's been an election. 10 million fewer people voted, 12 million switched sides. There's now momentum that we're going to basically be leaders rather than laggards in the field of blockchain and AI and other critical technologies as well. And so I've never in my life seen this much change in this short of a time, but it's an amazing time for the world, but in particular for the United States. And I could not be more excited right now.
You mentioned here in your answer a little bit about the future competitiveness of the US, for blockchain and AI, given the US election results. Can you please elaborate on what do you mean by that?
Well, you go from a world where you're afraid that you're so afraid of blockchain that you have a set of, I think it's been published now, 75 letters that have gone out from the FDIC, essentially telling banks, not only don't do crypto, don't do blockchain, don't even think about it without talking to us first, or else your life is going to be hell on earth. To a point where now you have a senator like Cynthia Lummis promoting a Bitcoin strategic reserve, where now we have a future where the way of dealing with the debt and the deficit is that US dollar will be backed by a strategic reserve of Bitcoin. So it goes from being the pariah to being the new goal and actually the anchor for backing the US dollar. The exchange currency of the world will be the dollar. The reserve currency of the world will be Bitcoin. And so you now have those things working hand in hand. Basically, the world's been divided into three buckets. There's all the fiat currency that's not the US dollar. It's as if those are shit coins in crypto parlance. There's the US dollar, which is actually more important than the United States. It's like the crypto, Star Trek means of exchange. It's like Libra realized, whether it's in a stable coin format or a deposit token format, that's the ideal means of exchange for the entire world, not just the United States. And then you have Bitcoin, which is essentially digital gold as a superior non-inflationary asset. Those three things work together. There should be clear regulation of each of those. They should complement each of those. And really, there's no holding back. We have an administration in place. I didn't personally vote for that administration, but my interests were aligned with that vision, even if my values in terms of how some people treat other people are not. But it's now a clear path. And really the question for the US is, does it want to be a leader or a laggard? And really the question to the rest of the world is, do they want to get in behind that? Or do they want to basically go short on Bitcoin, go short on the US? That's a pretty perilous short to take. People like Michael Saylor have gotten out in front of that tailwind. Now, I don't know how long that dance is going to last. And essentially what they've said is this Ponzi scheme of Bitcoin is better than the Ponzi scheme of the US dollar, and the Ponzi scheme of the US dollar is better than every other Ponzi scheme for every other fiat currency out there. Pick your choice, pick your poison, get your asset portfolio right, but get your butt in gear and get used to this is the way the world's going to work going forward. And that's very different than the last 4 years, which were fearful, head in the sand, lot of uncertainty, unclear rules, fear-based. So we are living in a different world.
Thanks for that, Greg. You mentioning there Bitcoin as a reserve going forward, that is one of the suggestions going forward. How feasible is that really to be implemented? Has it been done something similar in other parts of the world? And is it feasible to do it in the US?
Well, we did it with gold, and it just takes a change of imagination. I mean, people used to think that well, if you have no more gold or silver, you can't do anything. That's how the Spanish thought when they lost their armada. The Brits were like, well, we lose a ship or a fleet, we're just going to have debt. That was a new idea. That's how Britain defeated Spain. And so that ability to go from the gold standard was critical for the US, still having dollar supremacy independent of its gold position. And so people need a change in thinking, and we're having that change in thinking happening right now. It'll be interesting to see how it all votes, but it would have been inconceivable to think under the Biden administration that people would have been thinking of crypto as something that actually would be behind the US dollar and a means of reducing the debt of the country and keeping the US positioned as basically the world's reserve currency. And now we have that's everyday talk now. I don't know when it'll happen, but even the fact that we're conceptualizing like that changes the way that people think about asset allocation and what the role of blockchain and eventually AI will be in everything. And it used to be a risk if you played with these new technologies. Now it's a risk if you don't. And that's really the message to every other country. If you're going to basically put your head in the sand on this, next time you pull it out, you may be so far out of position, you really missed the boat. And so that's different from FOMA, fear of missing out. This is rules of the game have changed.
One question that has been raised already, even if the new administration is not in, is the idea of the consolidation of watchdogs in the US. Can you maybe explain to us, a little bit, how is that landscape of watchdogs currently working, and what does it mean, consolidation of watchdogs, and is that really feasible?
Well, there used to be a saying, you can't have a baby in less than 9 months just by having more men around, right? So just having more regulators around, all coming in and supposedly doing an exam of the same thing, as opposed to doing it once and doing it right, it's not clear what in the United States, we have the Fed has a regulatory group, the OCC, the FDIC, and then on top of that, you have all the state regulators, and then you have a regulator for the credit. I mean, it goes on and on. And so having overlapping regulators is a way of creating regulatory arbitrage. The biggest failure during the mortgage-backed security was when Countrywide, which I was inserted at, shifted from having its regulator being the Fed and the OCC. Oh, they're too hard on us, to finding the unsophisticated OTS, which had never regulated a company that big, and switching regulators. They were there through the entire financial crisis. They had never had a thoughtful thing to say. They were over their head. So if regulators are not in a position to actually assess risk, and they're only going in and doing a box checking exercise of risk processes without actually looking at risk, the question is, what value does the FDIC play as a regulator? Sure, as an insurance fund, I want there to be FDIC insurance, but you don't need a fleet of regulators going in. You could just rely on the regulatory review done by the OCC. So we would still have regulation. It could be tough regulation if we just had the OCC and state chartered regulators. You don't need the duplication of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve can still do monetary policy and payments, but it doesn't need to be a duplicate regulator to the OCC, just like the FDIC doesn't need to be a duplicate regulator to the OCC and state regulators. And so there's no other country in the world that has that overlap. You could still have a dual banking system of federal and state regulation. That only takes 2 regulators. You don't need 4 or 5. And so, you know, Elon's gotten onto something, and he's pointed to the fact, like, when did the FDIC actually, you know, it was around when Silicon Valley Bank happened. There was no fraud there. Everything was in plain sight. The regulators just were out of their depth. And so I'd rather have fewer regulators that know what they do, clear rules, exams, et cetera, as opposed to just like saying, well, let's just do it 3 times. That somehow is going to basically reduce risk and systemic risk in the system. And look, I understand the political reasons why it's tough to make these regulators go away. We got rid of one regulator. Never waste a good crisis. When we had the mortgage crisis, at least we got rid of the OTS and merged into the OCC. There's no reason that the FDIC, that the insurance function, couldn't be rolled into Treasury, and you know, and the reliance for actual regulatory reviews could be done by the OCC and the state regulators. So it is possible. Whether it's politically will actually happen, you know, that's another question. I have my own thing. When I applied to buy a bank that was state chartered and regulated and overseen by the FDIC, over the year period of which I had my contract to buy the bank, the FDIC never even recognized that my application to buy the bank was complete. And I even went through the pre-regulatory process. They just kept saying, here's another couple questions, another couple. I'm like, do you have all your questions answered? No, a couple more. And eventually they can kill anything just by sitting on it, right? And so that is, you know, that's not the American way. I mean, so yeah, the CFTC is running around proud that it earned $17 billion in fines last year. Well, you know, maybe it would have been good if you stopped some of the stuff that had been fined. You know, you're just collecting fines after the fact and saying, we're like making money. That's like Tony Soprano thinking. And look, the US can do better, and it will do better. I did not vote for this administration, but in this particular regard, you know, these guys are not going to do regulatory theater. You know, they're going to crack down on bad guys. They're going to crack down on fraud, but they're not going to pretend having a shadow shaming system of picking favorites and culprits is a substitute for good regulation. So if the Americans do, you know, kind of what they're showing they're going to do, it's going to be a message to the rest of the world that, you know, you guys better up your game too, because we're going to manage risk. We're not going to like run away from it. We're going to manage it. And managing risk is how you earn outsized returns. And the US is returning to that mindset. I'm running around. I'm looking to buy a bank in Europe. I'm just down here in Latin America. I just came back. The rest of the world's still there. They got 75% of the GDP. I'm going to play in it. But the leadership position in this regard, I believe, is shifting back to the United States.
Greg, you're mentioning, and it's a question from Agneta, what are you investing in? What are you doubling down on? You're mentioning a bank that you acquired pre-election. You're mentioning some banks post-election. tell us a little bit, even if you can't maybe tell all the names, like what are the reasonings behind and what are you targeting yourself?
Well, I think in the future, I've seen estimate is like current stablecoin market cap is about 200 billion. It's looking to be closer to 3 trillion in a couple of years. Stablecoins are great, much better than a lot of other options, 24/7, pretty efficient way to move money around. Got a couple of problems. They're issued by essentially money transmitters that are one for one, so they're not capital efficient. They don't lead to credit creation in the economy, which we need for growth. They don't have FDIC insurance. They don't have Reg E protections. They don't have identity. They can sit in a non-custodial wallet without identity. Great for like money laundering and terrorist financing and tax evasion. But they're still pretty damn good. But just imagine if you did all that and they were issued with all that through the banking system rather than going around the bank. Same technology, but cutting out the middleman. And so to me, I'm looking to buy and invest in banks that will create a better form of the US dollar and a better form of fiat currencies. I'll start with the top ones. So our view, of course, the reason I'm in Mexico is just imagine there's a ledger. Could be permissioned Ethereum, it could be Solana, it could be, and forget what chain it is, but it operates 24/7, low fees, and it carries all the dollars, pounds, euros, pesos, major currencies that people hold and do business in. And it's like going to the casino and getting poker chips. So those poker chips don't just work at the poker table. They don't just work at the whole casino. They work at every casino. And they don't just work at every casino. They work at 7-Eleven. So poker chips issued by the banking system, but usable thereafter for any exchange activity in the world without going back to the banking system. The banking system becomes an on-off rail. And yeah, we use all the regulation of the banking system to make a better dollar, a better tether, a better USDC. So I'm all in on that, because in a world where all real world assets are going to be tokenized, well, you're not going to go from a Ferrari to a Pokemon card through barter. You're going to go through money. And so if you're trading tokenized assets, you're going to want to have tokenized fiat currency. And so I'm getting, into those printing presses, and I want those licenses. So that's what I'm focused on. Is there are a lot of people out there that are venture capital funds, lots of like money transmitters, but there aren't that many people that have bank licenses that are fully bought in to blockchain. And really where AI comes in is you're going to do all this, but you're looking to figure out, is this money laundering? Is this fraud? And, the bad guys are pretty sophisticated. And so AI is pretty good at being on the other side of that. So AI has a perfect role in this, because you're going to have to transaction monitor all this. And you're going to have to look for what's normal versus abnormal. And one thing that AI is really good at is like figuring out what are abnormalities, because it looks at all the data. It doesn't have any particular prejudice. You can, give it some heuristics, but you say, you figure it out. You can see things probably I can't see. And so if you're going to have all this automation, all this money, all this velocity moving, you're going to have something looking to make sure that, it's not just a big conduit as it is currently for Tether and USDC for basically money laundering in the world, because it's, no better vehicle for money laundering than wallets without identity, and no limits on the amount or velocity that you can send. So that's great that something's faster and cheaper, but if it's not compliant, there's an opportunity. So I'm all in for investing in getting the regulated entities at the highest degree of trust, which is still the banking system. I'm not anti-government. I'm not anti-corporation, but I want to get those entities on chain, operating at global scale while still respecting local laws and rules. And so to me, blockchain with like AI compliance controls is it. They're not like fancy words anymore. They're like what, electricity and plumbing was to making our lives, livable in the 20th and 21st century. Blockchain and AI are just the new, indoor plumbing and electricity.
So thanks for that explanation, especially where you see both technologies kind of being complementary going forward. We have 3, 4, even 5 people that actually ask similar questions in slightly different ways. Where do you see that intersection and as concrete as you can, explaining the intersection between blockchain and AI, and where that can actually be very, very concrete as two complementary technologies?
Well, so when I was at Ripple, I had like a kind of a disagreement, and like Ripple's gone after the world of correspondent banking and wire transfers. And yeah, the XRP ledger, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's global, etc. The problem is, I said, hey, we, the Fed, charge wire transfers 25 cents. Banks charge 25 bucks. Why the $24.75 markup? It's all the compliance questions, risk questions, like, because when you move a wire, you can't like take it back. And so you better make sure that you're doing the right thing. And so all those controls are highly manual. That's why it's such a hassle to do like high value wire transfers. You got to check and make sure first authenticated the right person. Are they authorized? And then you got to say, is this transaction, does it look janky? Yes, no. And so all that can be done by some manual person, or it could be done by an AI bot. We have all these messaging systems now, and when someone puts it through a $10 million wire transfer, but they're doing it on chain, the AI bot needs to get on and say, hey, instead of a person calling that up, the AI bot can say, hey, why are you doing this? What's the documentation? Wow, this still looks janky. I better get the recipient on. I better get both of you to say what this is about. What's the provided as the underlying information, the bill of lading, whatever it is. And then immutably, I'm going to put that on chain. So if you guys want to lie, you're welcome to lie, but now you've immutably lied forever attached to your identity. Go ahead and make my day. And doing all that with AI and blockchain and immutability really makes the cost of being good a lot lower than the cost of being bad. And I'm not being a Boy Scout here. I'm just talking about how once you start lying and faking stuff for either fraud reasons or money laundering reasons, and there's a record and it points back to you, it's like the guy that robs the bank and there's a bomb that goes off and it taints all the money and stuff. Or like stealing bikes. And if the bikes have like a tracking device and you're the guy that's fencing the bikes, everybody's going to know you're the one that's fencing all the stolen bikes. Get those stolen bikes away from me. You can make crime not pay. You can make money laundering not pay, but you got to do it at scale. And AI is really good at being a Boy Scout at scale. It's not going to be perfect, but it's just like self-driving cars. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to be better than humans. And it's a highly repetitive task. Reputation matters. AI has no problem with big amounts of data and remembering who's been good and who's been not, right? And so once people build a good reputation for not being a fraudster, not being a money launderer, not doing tax evasion, they want to keep that reputation. And so people have an incentive to be good, not because they were like raised that way necessarily, maybe they were, but it's just easier to be good than to be bad. And blockchain and AI are two things that should bring out the best in us. Now, things can go wrong. I applied to go back to school. My degree at Cambridge is on AI ethics. I already know what my thesis is. It's AI ethics, because you could have all sorts of privacy invasion issues, and the interdiction of fraud, money laundering, terrorist financing in blockchain financial networks. That's it. That's what I'm going to be working on, because that's what we're going to be doing to recognize the benefit of these technologies at scale. So
thanks for that, Greg, and it resonates really well to me at least. AI, the Boy Scout at scale. I love that. Changing slightly question from Lucien at Trivest.
Sure.
Which cryptocurrency has the potential to become the bedrock for a more efficient global payment network, a potential challenge for Visa and MasterCard?
Well, everybody knows I'm a Solana fanboy, because like when I met Anatoly, I heard his accent. I said, where are you from? I'm from the Soviet Union. We build big rockets to like big payloads. He was not from the internet industry. He was not from the crypto industry. He was from the telecom industry. And he has like a single-minded focus on fast and cheap. And so payments, it's not about store value. It's about fast and cheap. Now, there are other chains out there, yada, yada, yada. But to me, that's a building block. We'll build in a multi-chain reality. Other chains are good. Ethereum, it's great to do programmability. Like folks like Stellar and Ripple, they're very focused on moving money around and stuff like that. But the concept of like, what is going to be faster and cheaper than Visa and MasterCard that is going to be, global, et cetera, and not have the anti-competitive aspects of Visa and MasterCard. I believe something built on top of a network like Solana could create a network. If you have identity and I have identity, we don't need to go through the banks. We don't need to go through Visa and MasterCard. We don't need to go through Apple or Google because we're on Ledger. You have credentials, I have credentials. We're just going to clear this transaction on us. All those other rent-seeking toll keepers, thank you very much, but no thank you. My vision of the world for payments going forward, payments are a public utility. What does that mean for pricing, both for P2P, B2B, and person to merchant or entity to merchant? The price is zero. The money to be made is on what banks do, intermediation between, for deposits between sources of funds and uses of funds. There's some small FX fee, very competitive for moving from one form of currency to the other. But the marginal cost of payments is almost zero. And if you want to basically prevent a race to the bottom, start at the bottom. What's that saying? If you're lying on the ground, you can't fall down. So if you start with the view that payments are going to be essentially free, it's like if there was fusion energy and energy was so cheap it didn't need to be metered. It changes all your thinking and business models, and it makes everybody else want to join that process as a consortium and not like compete with it, that my silo is going to beat your silo. This isn't like Highlander, one sword to rule them all. It's just a protocol-based view that payments in the exchange society, doesn't matter whether you're a capitalist or a communist, are a public utility and should be free. All the things you can build on top of that, all the value add, the risk, that's fine. But basic payment technology, and so something like Solana, it's so close to free already that somebody, the scheme administrator, can just absorb that cost. You don't need to have Solana. But whether it's Solana or something else, crypto rails that run at competition at price cost points that are equal or below the best practice uses of things like Visa and MasterCard today indicate the path toward winning.
So going now back again to AI, and AJ Ramachandran has a question, or actually there's three, but I'm going to go ask them in one go. When do you think we will achieve AGI and superintelligence? Do you think Google or OpenAI achieve those breakthroughs first, or does it come out of left field from another startup? Finally, is it a good time to invest in early stage AGI-focused startups?
So to me, I'm kind of like, I'm old school, artificial intelligence. Like when I was in university, we were like trying to use ways to figure out how to like track Soviet submarines and stuff like that. And so to me, this is just a continuum, and I don't really know what super intelligence means. Like, is it like when it beats me at the game of chess or Go, or like it, is it the fact that in my self-driving car, it doesn't hit the telephone poles? I don't believe there'll be a time when you're going to have like, AI being ethical and stuff like it. I just view AI as this like super intelligent chatbot, right? And it's garbage in is garbage out. So to me, there's no particular tipping point. What we've had is a period of acceleration with AI being able to talk to us in sort of a linguistic kind of way that feels like we don't really know whether we're talking to a human or a real bot. People have asked me, Greg, what are you going to do? You're going to have like bots that have like accounts that hold USBC, your deposit token. I'm like, yeah, I am. Well, aren't you worried? Those aren't real people. And I'm like, we've had this thing. It's called corporations. They're not real people. They're like built by people and they do their own things. And we've had that around. Like Mitt Romney said, corporations are people too. Everybody derided him, but he was kind of right. And AI agents are no different. And so we're in this continuum already. We're on a very steep curve right now where AI is coming in big chunks, but I don't see a particular tipping point. The other thing I would just say is that I don't view AI from an investment point of view. I just view AI as something that everyone is going to have to make or buy, and it's going to be kind of like table stakes and just built into everything. So, the question really is, what's the AI business model? Because I think of AI as kind of like plumbing, like for like flush toilets and electricity, which are really important. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't want to live in a house that doesn't have electricity and flush toilets, but it doesn't mean I'm running around investing in electric companies and plumbing companies, right? So, because I think it's just going to be part of the overall economy. And if you don't use good AI in your products, you're just basically not doing best practices. And so it makes it hard for me to figure out how that's all going to be captured as a business opportunity. So one of the reasons I'm not doing so much investing in AI companies. I'm sort of just investing in companies. It's kind of the opposite of people said, well, don't invest in gold mines, invest in the folks that are selling picks and shovels. And I'm like, everybody's going to be selling picks and shovels. So I'm still looking for gold mines.
Now, going to a critic of both AI and blockchain technology has been the energy use. So we have one question here from Agneta, and it goes, what are the energy climate implications for increased use of AI and blockchain? What can and is done to mitigate the increased data center energy use? Is that enough?
Well, I'm a market guy on this. Like, all this stuff competes. It's people are like, oh, there's not enough water. We need to cut back on, like, drinking in showers in cities in California and stuff like that. Just, I hear all that, but with all due respect, like, there's plenty of water in California. We just decided to grow like almonds and walnuts in the desert. Like, the use of water rights in California is a great example. Water rights are something we're inherited, and we treat water as if it's free. And you just have rights to it. Like, it's not actually priced by the market. Once the market is out there, people that are using absurd uses, whether it's water or in this case, electricity, they're going to have to pay. And so there is going to be competition between what are we doing with all that, energy. And so whether it's nuclear or solar, obviously it's better if it's renewable than it's just, it's one time. We aren't growing any more dinosaurs. They're not going to be carbon independent of all the harm it does to the global economy. But I do think that to some extent, I'm an optimist that pricing will solve the energy issue. And so we just have to decide, what do we want to spend energy on? Do we want it to be like run amusement parks, or do we want to run like AI bots? And the market will decide. So I ran for Congress in Nevada, and we have like the world's largest supply of lithium in my district. We have incredible, with more sunshine and solar, etc. So the generation of that is one thing. What the use is going to be determined by the market. And I do trust the market will provide a solution here. I think it'll move things toward renewables over time. I don't feel like there's a strong need to overthink this, that humans have proved themselves very resourceful in this regard over time. And I don't see any challenge. Obviously, I think like proof of stake is more efficient than proof of work. There's just, what was Obama's foreign policy? Don't do dumb stuff, right? So for energy, obviously, I won't say obviously, but I do support us looking again at things like nuclear energy. I like the fact that there's research on fusion. So I don't want us to keep destroying the ecology of this country and this world simply because we don't have good ways for producing the energy to support the demands of running blockchain networks and strong AI data centers.
Okay, I'm taking one question from the chat. That there are quite a lot of questions still that were sent to me before. There is one question here from Todd Miller in the chat. Does your vision, Greg, for a regulated blockchain-based financial system conflict with the inevitable high rent cost and barriers to participation of operating in that more centralized system?
So sorry, is the question, sorry, what's the question in that?
Todd, do you want to kind of rephrase it maybe better? I was just reading it out.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dušan. Yeah, hey, Greg. Yeah,
Sure.
I was really interested in your concept of a blockchain-based financial system. But then as you described it, I was kind of concerned about, do you want to have it fully regulated and managed by centralized entities like banks and so forth? And will that sort of conflict with what has been a strength of a decentralized financial network that sort of lies outside of what we have today? Or some.
Well, think of it, think of it this way. That would be like saying, and again, I'm coming from Nevada. So it would say like, well, the casinos, well, they mint the poker chips. But now once the poker chips are out there, you know, you could go shopping at 7-Eleven and get a spicy dog with them. And so I don't really view that as, oh, well, the casinos are controlling, you know, because they're the centralized authority controlling what you can do with the poker chips. I'm just saying that the standards for identity and whatnot are going to be compliant with the laws of government, right? So I'm not promoting a Mad Max world where everybody has a form of money and there's no oversight for tax evasion, fraud. Like, so, but what you can do with the money, as long as, you know, the guys with, you know, badges and guns aren't coming to cuff you because you broke the law, if it's legal and it's licensed, the sky's the limit. So I view that as a very decentralized vision of what you can do once you have the poker chips. There are always going to be controls because we don't live in a world without, you know, norms and whatnot. And there'll be a fight. There'll be fight like, you know, China says this was okay. Russia says it wasn't. The United States doesn't. Like, whatever. Those countries are still going to have disputes because these transactions are going to happen between people with sovereignty in different countries. The server's here, you know, the payer was here, the payee was there, you know, the product was there. Like, we're going to have all sorts of wars over, you know, who gets to decide who gets cuffed and not, right? But for the transactions that, you know, people aren't fighting over in that regard, I view that as completely decentralized, even though some of the institutions that are behind, like FDIC insurance and whatnot, are centralized institutions and whatnot. So that's sort of the trade-off. I call it regulated DeFi. And so, you know, so that's the trade-off I'm, you know, willing to pay. And I think I'm willing to have even a bit more centralized control. So consumers do have Reg E protections. There is FDIC insurance, all the kind of things that you don't get. Like, I got hacked recently, I got phished, and my personal money at Coinbase was all stolen. And Coinbase is like, tough nuts, you got hacked. And I'm like, no, you got hacked. And if it was the banking system, I'd get my money back. Coinbase is just like, yeah, you know, not your keys, not your money. So I'm like, so in regulated DeFi, people ask me if I issue a deposit token and somebody comes and says, you know, this transaction was not authorized, can I get my money back? I'm going to say like, yeah, because we approved that transaction. It went from one identified holder on the USDC network to another. You know, we're going to find that guy, we're going to track him down, we're going to cuff him, and you'll get your money back right away. And I think that's a better world than a world that's more Mad Max. And I might be wrong, but we'll find out. We'll find out who wants to live in a world where you do have consumer protections, you do have insurance. You know, think of the advantage. I'm just going to recap them. If we do this with the central authorities, we avoid runs because we have the Federal Reserve is like the lender of last resort. So even if one of the banks is a run, they'll step in. That's the liquidity management. Then there's solvency. So the bank goes under, or the issuer of the thing goes under. It's insured. You get your money back. Now, I got defrauded. Well, okay. We have like Reg E protections. You get your money back. Like all these things, you go after one of money laundering. Well, we know who's on both sides of the transaction. I think all those things are things that we're willing to make a compromise on to feel safe and trusted. There are people that are willing to go without 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those things. And they're moving Tether around because they're just happy to get their money out of China, you know? And as long as it doesn't blow up while they're doing their transaction, the music's still playing, you know, they're better off than they were. But I think that's part of the world. I want to get my money out of China. Tether's good to do it. But I think for everyday boring stuff, we'd like to not have to worry about solvency, liquidity, fraud, compliance, right? Like just have that built in. And so, but use all the technology of blockchain, do it at a global scale, overlay it with AI. That to me, there's a name for it. It's called Star Trek, right? Doesn't matter that you're Cleons, Romulans, you're blowing up each other's universe. At least you're all using the same form of money and buying dilithium crystals, right? Let's get on with it. And so I'm trying to write the chapters that are missing that explain how we shortcut to that world.
Thanks for that explanation, Greg. I hope that was more clarifying for you, Todd. We have two more questions that I'll do. We have 7 minutes left. I'll take them from the chat. From Victor from Anchain. Thanks for supporting Anchain since our early days. The last couple of years are tough to run crypto companies in the US, so led to exodus of talent. What geographical regions do you predict will have growth in the next 4 years? I guess other than the US.
Well, I'm just down Argentina. I have $280 billion of $100 bills sitting under mattresses. It's the biggest source of US dollars outside. That's just one example. So the odd thing is I've been spending time in BRICS countries. They hate this US dollar dominance thing, but they say all that. But what do they love? They love US dollars and stuff. So I do view the BRICS regions of the world as being faster growing places. So I see my growth and my markets as everywhere but the US. I mean, I'll build in the US because people like that safe asset, but who wants to use it? Everyone else. Americans need it the least. They might still use it, but they're the ones that already have access. So my marketplace is everybody that has a hard time getting access to something that's safe, easy, cheap to use. And so, that's why I'm going to the places I'm going to.
Thanks for that, Greg. I have one question from Patty here. So great insights. Curious on your thoughts, Greg, on how blockchain and AI could help with the DOGE charter of streamlining government. I guess it's what Elon Musk has been talking about a lot. How can startup and entrepreneurs contribute? Examples like getting government spend on chain for increased transparency.
Yeah, well, having suffered through regulatory exams where things like Silicon Valley Bank blowing up, Silicon Valley Bank didn't blow up because there was fraud or somebody hid something. It was in plain sight. So we have layers and layers of regulation and regulatory oversight that simply amounts to box checking. It's theater. It's not the management of risk. It's the management of risk processes. I don't mean to poo-poo risk processes, but you can spend all your time, checking gear, checking this or checking it. But at the end of the day, when you're climbing a mountain, if you're going to go below something that could fall on you, like it's called an avalanche, kill you, that's risk. You can do all the processes you want, but at the end of the day, you got to decide you want to climb that mountain. Managing risk as opposed to risk processes is a very different thing. It's about taking information, making it transparently available to folks like regulators. I want regulation, but it's got to be entirely different. And so the process we have now of going through these regulatory exams, they're not catching, the Maxes of the world, the Sams of the world, or even the CZs of the world. Like, Sam basically took other people's money and went to the casino. CZ was like, well, here's the back door on KYC, and doesn't matter that we're servicing, the Russian Silk Road or helping North Koreans build, nuclear missiles. It's like money to be made, we're going to do it. So you got regulators chasing folks that are trying to comply with the law and suing, the Ripples and the Coinbases and basically exercising a shadow campaign of discouraging a whole industry, as opposed to what I think this administration is going to be, which is go after fraud. When you're going to go after fraud, you need guys that are actually really out there looking at real risk, real abuse, and going after that, as opposed to like a whole shadow shaming infrastructure to simply defend and support the status quo. And so I am for tough regulations and tough enforcement of the bad guys, not the good guys that are simply challenging the status quo. And look, I'm from the status quo. I'm from the deep state. I've been, and I'm not like shaming the guys that are the people that are in, the status quo world of folks that are at risk because they've been collecting economic rents. You got Apple and Google charging 30%. You got Visa and MasterCard charging 3%. You know, you got the banks charging $25 for something that they pay 25 cents for, 10,000% markup. You know, that's all dragging growth. It's all chewing up energy. And there's an alternative to that. And it's not automatic. We don't just get a hall pass. We got to work to make it happen. But there's a team of the best and the brightest out there that are starting to use the tools to make that happen. And you can't expect the guys that are going to lose the power because they're sitting up there. They're just going to voluntarily hand it over. You know, you're going to have to go in there and, you know, exercise your right to party. And, you know, no offense against the folks that are, you know, already sitting at the commanding heights, but frankly, I'm just saying, especially now where we are on the S curve, it's a lot more fun to be on the disruption side because the disruption is now going mainstream. Before we were too early on the S curve, and it was hurt by the fact that anything you did that was kind of like bright and thoughtful, you might get a Wells notice and be sued your ass. And, you know, that's not a lot of fun. And so now I'm much less. Let me put it this way. All these things they said were unsafe and unsound to do or even think about. Now it's unsafe and unsound to not think about them and not do them. So we're at an entirely different part of the curve about what safety and soundness is. And I couldn't be more excited about that.
Thanks for that, Greg. We have 1 minute left. One last question that was pre-sent before. Quick question, quick answer. Stablecoins. Ripple is launching or has launched one. You were previously involved in that company. You have some plans yourself. Where do you see the future of stablecoins? What is your view?
Well, stablecoins are great. They're better than, you know, everything else we got out there. My question is, are stablecoins the intermediate step to deposit tokens and the tokenization of all real world assets? So stablecoins is, I will call it the lazy man's approach to real world assets, because you mint them, you know, you get to sit on the float like Tether, you make more money than BlackRock or Goldman Sachs, and not my problem about what people are doing with them between the on and off ramp. And so it's party on right now, but I think a day of reckoning will come around consumer protection and compliance. But in the meantime, party on stablecoins. Don't be surprised if I'm not participating in stablecoin market as well. But, you know, I'm looking down the road, and it's like that movie, you know, Armageddon. There's big meteor coming, and like next time there's some terrible thing that's happened because of money laundering, terrorist financing, and people say, well, you know, they paid for it with stable coins. You know, I think there's going to be legislation that tightens up those loopholes.
Thank you very, very much, Greg, for this. You've been a huge inspiration for me for the last 10, 15 years since we met. I think it was 2011, 12. I had my 3 exits, whatever, in 10 days with whatever European payments companies, and you started to talk about Twitter, about Square, about the big picture, what will happen in the world. So it's been astonishing to follow you. I'm super happy that you are still giving trust into us and investing into us as well.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Greg.
Bye-bye.
Bye.